was a lot more difficult because the language is difficult. Not very many people spoke English, and because everything's in Cyrillic, it wasn't until many years later that when you would go to Russia that you would actually see English style letters with Cyrillic. So this is fascinating to me, like how they kind of accommodated a more international. Hang on one second. Sorry. So so it's like for me, Poland was much easier because we were living in Warsaw, where there were a lot of internationals, and there were people grew up learning English as part of their curriculum for school. And so even when I would go into a shop to buy bread, there was a way to converse. I thought it was very interesting, just the different holidays and things that people celebrated. Family, the culture of family was really strong in Poland, and they had a lot of interesting religious practices, but they weren't biblical. They were traditions that were brought on by. Do you understand the word superstition?
I can just write it and translate.
Yeah, okay. Superstition.
Oh, I see. Okay, understand. Like some from other religions or some folks.
Yeah, like when I'm in Russia, I and this is anywhere in the East Europe. Whenever I'm with a taxi driver, if they pass a church, they cross themselves. This is superstition. Like if I don't acknowledge God like this, then I'm not a good person, or I won't have good things happen to me, or so there was a lot of that kind of superstitious stuff, like in some of their holidays, like Christmas and New Year's, and we have in America we do not celebrate All Saints Day. Do you know what this holiday is? We call it Halloween. It's more of a I like to call it a Hollywood version of All Saints Day. It's like, it's more commercial. It's about getting candy and kids wearing costumes, and but we don't really celebrate All Saints Day. But in Poland, they believe that this is where you remember your family, and by remembering your family, you help them go to heaven. So there was lots of superstitious type things wrapped in their holidays, and we found that to be interesting. People were very hospitable to us, very kind. We in America, everyone has a car. Even the poor have cars. Our whole society in most of America, like there are certain cities like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and even Los Angeles, where they rely heavy on buses and metros. But the only place where there's an underground subway system is New York. Everywhere else, there's very little subway. Everybody has a car, and everybody does life by driving to it. We don't walk in our society. In fact, our communities are built where we don't live in high rises, we live in houses that next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to go to the store, it would take me an hour to walk to the store. But in Poland, if I wanted to go to the store, all I did was come down my apartment, walk out my door, and there was a store there to get groceries.
And the same with my house.
Yeah. I mean, it's Eastern Europe. I mean, most of Europe was like that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, living in the city was different. Living in an apartment high up in the air was different. And just being around people that had different ways of viewing the world. So yeah, it was a really interesting time for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you were like your ministry coordinator, as I suppose.
Well, yeah, I'm a regional director. So what I was doing when I was living in Poland was coaching and training and encouraging and basically pastoring, shepherding the leaders of different churches like you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, some of them were what we call members of Communitas.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's a member.
Mm-hmm.
And they can freely come and go, and they can resource with us, they can learn with us, they can share their resources with us. And then there are people that are actually staff members. So we have people like who started a church in Warsaw for the international community. They're actually on our staff. So I'm technically I'm their boss. I'm not your boss. I'm just the regional director for Communitas, but you and we call ourselves partners. We have a partnership with you. Mm-hmm. And even though this church that got planted in Warsaw is a partnership, technically I'm his boss. Mm-hmm. So I don't tell him what to do, but like you and your boss in the denomination, we talk about things, and I may ask him to do some stuff. But mostly, like 99% of the time, he follows the leadership of his church, mm-hmm. the elder board. Mm-hmm. So, and I just coach and train them. So that's what I did. When I went there, the purpose of us going for a couple of years was to establish more ministry in Poland, which happened, and then be better connected and develop a team of people who would oversee the work in Russia, because we knew Russia was going in a direction that, not the direction that it is today, but the direction of, less and less, Western people being able to come in and talk about religion. And but it was always our desire. We always desire to work in countries where the leaders are actually from that country. We don't have a desire to come in and be Americans who lead Russian work. We want Russians to lead Russians. Mm-hmm. But we know that there's a few years where that has to be developed. So.
Okay. And
yeah.
How long time have you been living outside the United States?
Well, okay. So the way that I lived in Russia it was too hard to get a residential visa for me to stay. So what I would do is the way that my visa worked was I could come and live 2 or 3 months. So generally I would come for like 3 months. Mm-hmm. And then I would come back to the States for 6 months. And then I'd come back to Russia for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a long time. So I want to say over 15 years, I probably lived there 2 years. year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Poland, we lived for 2 years. So I lived maybe 4 or 5 years outside of the US.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But technically, it was in 15 years. You just moved to United States and back to Russia for 2 or 3 months. Okay.
Like every year, I would say I spent a total of like 4 to 5 months a year in Russia,
Mm-hmm.
and then 5 or 6 months in America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of the things that I could do was I would go and live in Russia for a couple months. Then I would go to Holland. I had an apartment in Holland
Mm-hmm.
that was part of Communitas's office. So they in Holland the houses are, multi-story.
Mm-hmm.
On the top there was an apartment for staff that would come in for meetings,
Mm-hmm.
and it had I think 3 bedrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would do is I would go to Russia first, spend a couple months there, then I would come to Holland and live there for a month, and then I would come home for 6 months.
Mm.
Then I would come back to Russia for a couple months, go to Holland for a month, then back home again. Yeah. Well, I was single. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a wife. So, I just, that's how I lived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had a very tiny, tiny apartment that I lived in. Very small.
Okay.
My friend had a big house. And next to his house, he built this little apartment. And I rented that apartment from his family. So it was great for me because, I knew my stuff was safe. It wasn't expensive. So that's how I lived for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got married, and then my wife and I moved, after a couple of years of being married, we moved to Poland for 2 years. So.
Well, I think when you live like an uploaded life, when you all the time you're busy, you just need some place to sleep and maybe to eat, and that's all.
Right.
Okay. And uh, so could you tell about some maybe problems or maybe opportunities which you saw in the culture differences? Maybe you were surprised in some culture differences, and that helped you to describe gospel to the other culture. Maybe some
Yeah.
traditions.
Yeah. I would say that when we were living in Poland and living in Russia, I had very much the same experience. So people, when they found out I was American, which was pretty quick because I didn't speak the language, so they would listen to me, and you could tell pretty quickly it was not British, it was American, or Canadian. I mean, I guess some people thought I could be Canadian, but obviously American. And they were always, most people were very, if in Russia, if they didn't like Americans, they just wouldn't talk to me. Like I never knew if they didn't like me. I mean, because they just never inquired. They didn't care. But but the ones who were intrigued because I was American, boy, that opened great doors for people. So conversations were really easy. People wanted to practice their English with me. People would meet me in coffee houses and bring interpreters who could interpret. When we lived in Poland, it was the same thing. We actually lived in a very big apartment complex where there was a lot of other people from other countries, and so they all spoke English. And so I would go down with my son to the playground because our apartment was like a square, and in the middle was this playground and park. So the building was huge, and then in the middle was these two parks, and we could look out our window, and you could see the kids playing and having fun, and so I would go down there with my son, and I would meet other parents. And as soon as they found out I'm American, they would ask me all kinds of questions about America and, what do I do and what's it like growing up in America. And then also in Russia was the same thing. And what was cool is that our traditions, they were interested in our traditions. Well, most of our traditions are Christian based. So they want to know how you celebrate Christmas. How do you celebrate Easter? What do you do for the New Year's? A lot of my friends in Russia like the idea of 4th of July, which is our Independence Day. So we celebrate every year our Independence Day from Britain, because America got its start from the United Kingdom. And then we fought a big war to get our independence, and we celebrate that every year. And it's a big holiday here. It's fireworks, we sing songs, we barbecue. It's a lot of fun. And in some ways it's lost its meaning. It's now it's more like we celebrate being American. It's kind of a selfish, like, oh, we're so proud we're Americans, yay, but what's fun is that because people are intrigued by this, then it opens up doors to talk about Jesus and the gospel. When I was in Russia, I would say there was number of times when I would do something for my neighbor. So I lived in a couple apartments that the neighbors around me were older people. And sometimes I would help them carry their groceries, or one time, I'm trying to think of some of the things that I did, but help them do something at their house, I would never go inside, but I would go I would see her carrying, she'd have a couple bags of groceries on the ground. She had to go up a staircase. Well, I'd come and grab the bags and carry them up there, and then she would take them in the house, right? Because obviously in Russia, it's not like America. Like in America, if someone wanted to come to my house and come in, I would, if I knew them or if they were my neighbor, I would say, oh, you come on in, But in Russia, it's more private. And people would always be asking me, why are you doing this? Why would you do this? This is weird. Why are they so nice? And it would open up opportunities to talk about the gospel, for sure. But it also worked the other way around. So when living in Poland, living in Russia, so I had some friends that in Russia that were not believers, and I would ask them to take me on tours of the cities. And inevitably, everywhere you go, the Orthodox Church is there, and it's interesting to go see them. And this would open up great religious opportunities for me to share the gospel, because they would have to tell me what they knew of their religion, And some of them didn't know much at all, but it still was an interesting to be able to open up and have conversations about it.
It's like the taxi driver you told, which crosses himself. Why do you do this? In case if God exists.
Right.
Okay.
It was funny that when I would because I did taxis were my way of transport in Russia. Primarily because everywhere I lived, the buses, if I knew the bus and I knew where it was going, then I could take the bus sometimes. But the problem was that if I got on a bus and I went somewhere I didn't know, then finding my way was really difficult. Because in those early days, I didn't have cell phones, or cell phones didn't have GPS. So now, when I go to Russia, the first 15 years that I went to Russia, I would never dream of driving a car. Never, no way. But now, because of GPS, I can drive, I can go, go places. I could fly in the airport, rent a car, drive to, Volgograd and not be afraid of driving there because I have directions to get there.
I think these days there are some problems with GPS in Russia because my phone doesn't want to work and he just shows me a huge spot like a kilometer radius, and it's because some processor um, brands don't want to work with GPS in Russia, and that's why I can't move on my car in the small streets because I see a huge spot and I don't know where I am. So
Right.
I remember the first time when Americans came to our city. It was so funny when Russian people, which don't know English, wanted to describe something. They just try to speak louder in Russian, and they think that that Americans would understand it better.
Yeah. And the funny thing was too, I started after living there for a while, I could understand. It was hard for me to speak Russian, but I could understand it. So I learned a few words. So like for instance, like when I would go to the market in America, everything has a tag that tells you the price in the market. So milk, you can see how much it cost. In Russia, this is not so. So if I wanted to get something and I was in a smaller market, I would have to go up and I'd say skolka, right? And then they would start talking Russian to me and I'd be like, oh my gosh, and it would be like, all I wanted to know was like, how much, right? You'll laugh at this. So we moved to Poland. It was our first couple weeks living in Poland. And in Poland, almost within very close proximity of where you live, usually there's a bread shop, a meat shop, and then a store. And so when you're driving through Poland, you're driving through the city, almost every building has 1, 2, or 3 of this, right? So in our building, I went downstairs to get some meat and I wanted to make sandwiches. So I went and bought the bread, no problem. We already had all the other stuff, cheese and everything. So I get the bread at the store and then I go to the meat market to get fresh meat. And I want it sliced up. So I go up. Nobody speaks English. These 2 girls, none, not even one word. And I say to them, can I have, slice this thick? They understood what I said. Like they figured it out. And then they look at me and they're talking to me in Polish. And so then they start saying kilogram. They're saying kilogram. And I said, oh, and I didn't know what I was saying. I thought I was telling her that I just wanted a quarter, like 1/4 a kilogram of meat. She gave me 4 kilograms of meat. So I come home to my wife with ham of 4 kilograms. Like, she's like, what did you do? And I'm like, she misunderstood me and I couldn't say no, It was very funny. So we ate ham for like 2 weeks. But yeah, those are the funny stories, But the gospel stories are amazing. When we left Poland a year ago, my wife has maintained relationship with 3 women who don't know Jesus, and she's remained close to them. They talk almost 3-4 times a month. They talk. And then for me, I maintain 2 relationships with guys that don't know Jesus. And we text some, and we talk every couple months. In fact, Vartan, this driver, you know, it was kind of funny. He's a great guy, and I haven't talked with him for a long time, but a few months. But yeah, he's an interesting guy. All right, what other questions you got for me?
You just told about the 4 kilograms piece of meat, and I just, thought about some joke. I have my grandparents. Some of my grandparents are from Ukraine, and they like bacon or fat.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a joke that I changed the fridge for a similar piece of fat, like.
That's funny.
Okay, so could you describe your readiness level when you moved to the other culture? Were you ready to this new period of your life?
Yeah. Well, yes, because my wife has traveled a lot. She traveled a lot with me, but before we met, she had lived overseas a few times, and she had traveled a lot. And then with my job and the way that I lived overseas, I mean, for me, I kind of know like what to expect. And then we had gone in our marriage. We had lived in Poland for like a couple weeks at a time. So like we'd go to the summer, we'd go there for like a month. And so I think we were prepared. We were prepared for that. I mean, obviously there's always challenges like, the first couple months, like trying to get furniture in our apartment was a challenge because in America, everybody has a truck. Like trucks are popular. So when we moved here, I've got neighbors who were like, "Hey, if you need to borrow my truck or you want me to pick something up for you, it's super easy." Right? But in Poland, nobody has a truck. I mean, zero. You have to hire a truck to bring your furniture. I didn't know this. You could rent a truck, but it's expensive. And, anyway, it was just very, challenges like that. Another challenge for me was the health system was very challenging. The public, what they call the public health system, we had to be registered to use it. I mean, if it was an emergency, they would take you. So we got registered. It took forever to get help, to whatever. So we ended up going private. So I paid for some insurance and got private health care. And that was a little bit easier to navigate because someone in the office spoke English and they would help us. So yeah, those things were difficult. I think it was difficult too that sometimes just little things would happen that, like for Americans, our comfort is a big deal. So you shop like once a week. So like my wife, when we living here in America, you would go to the store once a week and you get everything. We have big refrigerators. We have 2 refrigerators here. And you just you have everything that you need. And so you don't have to go to the store all the time and be with people all the time. But in Poland, even though you could go get the stuff, where are you going to put it? Because the fridges are small. So you're very limited what you could get. And generally, we had to relearn. And so you were going to the store like every other day or every 2 or 3 days, right? But that's normal life for a Polish person. In fact, it's very common for Polish people when they're coming home from work. Like we learned, do not get stuff in the afternoon because when they come home from work, the stores are all full. Because everybody's coming home, they get their stuff and then they go home and make it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the mornings, when everybody's going to work, very few people are in those stores. So that's when you go. I mean, just silly things like that, right? Um, yeah, it was fun.
So in Russia, lots of big stores are closing, but small stores are just opening new. So many small stores. When I go home, I just see one, two, three, like five maybe new stores monthly. You know, and we just go home and we go to the store and buy something for 1 or 2 days, and that's enough. Okay,
Yeah.
and tell me, please, how did you overcome some difficulties in the communicating with people? Because when I'm forgetting some words in English, I'm feeling confused, and it's so hard for me, and I'm uh, like now I'm feeling confused because I can't
Sure.
translate some word which I wanted to say. And how did you feel this in these situations?
Yeah. I would say that the first few months in Poland, I ran into, it was quite like, it wasn't unusual to run into situations where nobody spoke English. And I didn't know what to do. And then I started to, and then other people that were English speakers that were living there, there was one guy said, "Hey, there's this great app, and some people use Google Translate. So if after living there for a few months, when I would go down to that shop to get meat, I could put it in Google Translate, hit translate button, and there was actually a speak button. And I would hit that, and the women would listen, and they would go, "Oh, okay." And then they would, and every time it was perfect. It worked. So if it wasn't for technology, it would have been really hard. In fact, what we did for a little while is my wife knew how to speak a little bit of Polish, and if we were going somewhere for something specific, she would actually write it on paper, and then I would take it with me and show it to them, and then they would go, "Oh, okay." Like sometimes she would want me to go to. There was these specific bakeries that made like cakes and pies and things. Picarnia is what they call them.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would go there to get something specific, like Google Translate can't help me because there's special names.
Mm-hmm.
So if I put cake in there, it's just going to say cake in Polish, but there's 50 cakes. So she would actually write it out what she wanted. Or like when I would go shopping at a store for something that she needed specific, she baked a lot. So there was like 50 different types of flour. So she would write it out in Polish, the specific flour she wanted. And then we found out that all the flours had numbers.
Mm.
So if you wanted a wheat flour, that was number 561. If you wanted a rye flour, that was like 502. So then that was just super easy then. So we learned the system, and then when I would go shopping, she would say, "Oh, get that flour 502 for me, will you?" Of course, I'll go get that flour, and I would look, and then there's 502, take it and go, right? So,
Please give me the bread number 607.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you numerous, like Vartan, this guy that I told you about. So Vartan and I so Vartan, uh, what happened was is we moved to Poland, or no, I'm sorry. We were visiting Poland for the summer. Before we were going to move there, we wanted to come for a couple months and see if we liked it. So we came for a couple months, and we didn't have a stroller for Joseph. So you know what a stroller is, right? Pram, you know, you push your kid in the stroller. So, so they had this this application on they had an application on that was like, do you guys have Facebook Marketplace or OLX?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, it's a place where you can go and look for used items and then buy them from people.
I see.
Okay. So I found this stroller that was perfect, good price, really pretty new. And so I wanted to go get it, and it was about 15 minutes, 20 minutes away from where we were living. So I ordered an Uber, and this guy shows up, and it's this guy named Barton. And he speaks English pretty good. And so we start talking, and he's from Ukraine, and he immigrated to Poland. And so we're talking, he's a young guy, and we're having a good time talking. Well, I did not know this, but when I put the address into Uber to go get this stroller, you could have the street name and the numbers, and it could be like it could be in any city around Warsaw. It would, because this street could be a street in every single town. So when I put it in Uber, I selected a town that was 15 minutes away, thinking it was the place, and I didn't know. So we drive 20 minutes. I'm in the back, and he's driving me, and I'm telling him what's happening, and so he's going to take me there, and then I'm going to pay him, and he's going to take me back. So we get it all worked out. He drives me. We go to this place, and I get out, and he says, "Do you want me to translate? I speak Polish." And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so, or no, he doesn't offer to translate. I'm sorry. He stays in the car, and I walk up to this house, and there's a man, and he's working on his car, and we're standing there, and he he says to me, the guy looks smoking a cigarette, and he's like, what do you want? You know, like, and I said, "Hey, I'm here for the stroller, you know, little kid stroller." And he sees this car parked out front where I came from, and he's like, "Oh, the stroller." And I said, "Yeah, the stroller." But he doesn't say it. He says it in Polish. So he leaves, he goes in his garage, and 5 minutes later he comes out with this like contraption, like this thing for cars to fill up your tire, like fix your tire. And he's dragging it out, like, no, I'm here for the stroller. And he goes, "This is the stroller." And we go back and forth like for like 2-3 minutes. He's trying to figure it out. Then he gets his son comes out, his wife comes out. We're all trying to, and Vartan's in the car. He doesn't see me. And so I go back to Vartan. I said, "Vartan, do you speak Polish?" And he says, "Yeah, I do." And he comes in, and he starts, and we're all dying in laughter because he thinks I'm asking him to help fix my car that I got a flat out in front of his house, and I'm asking him for a stroller for my baby. And so we're just laughing. Well, come to find out, the guy says to me, "Well, you got the right address, but you're in the wrong city." So Vartan says to me, "I'm sorry, you put in the wrong city." He's like, "I don't know what to do. I feel so bad. Maybe I should refund you the money." And I said, no, Vartan, this isn't your fault. It's my fault. So Vartan says, well, let's go back and look in your app and see what the address is, and maybe it will tell us what city. And sure enough, it did. And so he puts it in. Well, now it's like an hour and 10 minutes all the way across Warsaw to go get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent almost $100 driving in the Uber, and the stroller was only $50. But Martin, I ended up sitting up front with him, and for that whole hour and 10 minutes, and then another 30 minutes to our home, I spent 2 hours just talking to him about Jesus, about what I do, and it was unbelievable. And he just talked. He says, hey, can we meet again and keep talking about Jesus? My wife is religious. So we ended up having dinner with them, and I met him several times, and we just kind of built this relationship. And when we moved there, we met with them. I think we met with them twice, but they were going through he had to go through a job change. He didn't have a car, so it became more difficult to meet him, and they were on the other side of the city. But we've kept a friendship,
So it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, we make mistakes, but God turns them into opportunities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great story. And what are the difference, when people resolve conflicts, maybe in the United States or in Poland or in Russia? What are the difference?
So I'll tell you the difference in Russia. Russians, because of my role and who I was, I think many times if there were potential problems or conflict, they would never say anything to me. They would avoid conflict. In fact, if I asked them their opinion, like if I said to you right now, Dima, tell me, what do you think? What do you really think about our training every month?
Mm-hmm.
Do you like our training? I would say that 98% of Russians would not tell me the truth. They don't lie. They just don't tell me everything.
That's true.
So they would just say, oh, it's good for this, it's good for that. Thank you, Mike. We really like you, Mike. Your coaching's great. We really like you. And then when you become friends where they trust you, then that number drops to like 50%. And then those 50% that are not really telling you everything, if you ask them the right questions and you talk, then eventually you'll get the full truth. In Poland, it was a little bit like this as well. I think because there's a very similar in some ways. I mean, Poland was part of the USSR for a long time, so there was that kind of, but the younger generation had no problem telling you and very forthright. So it was just the opposite. Like in Russia, I was like, man, I don't even know if what we're doing is the right thing. No one tells me anything. In Poland, you'd get done and they'd say, man, your sermon, this was good, but this really sucked. And you're just like, what? Oh my gosh. In our culture, Americans call it being social etiquette.
Mm-hmm.
You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So another way of saying it would be like politically correct. Mm-hmm. So if I said to you, Dima, your sermon was really good. And man, these 2 or 3 points were really great. But this one point here, I don't really know if I understood what you were trying to get at, maybe you and I could talk about it or it was just a little bit, but it was good. Thank you. So it's kind of like a very nice way of saying your sermon was okay, but some of the points were not quite, I didn't really quite get it.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
And were there some situation where when you were like a peacemaker between two people in Russia or in United
Yeah.
States? What is the difference between these peacemaking processes?
Okay. That's a really good, and that happens a lot. Because I've been to Russia so many times and I have so many friends working together.
Hmm.
So to give you an example, like in Russia, it's like if, like, let's say we're at a conference and I have two guys that are working on my team to provide this conference, and there's a problem between them.
Hmm.
Uh, for me to tell them they got to fix this problem, it's like almost impossible. Like, are you kidding me? No, no, no. What they just eventually, the way that they would approach it is eventually something will get worked out. The conference will be over. We won't be around each other for a while. When we come back, we'll just forget about it. It's in the past. We don't really need to deal with this.
Hmm.
But inevitably over time, because we're humans, it does bother us. And so then the next time you plan a conference, these two guys who had the conflict are thinking, hey, this is how they responded to me in this issue. And when this issue comes up in this conference, it's going to be probably the same. So Americans are used to having people pull them aside and say, this bothers me, talking about our feelings and then talking about the problem. In Russia, we could talk about the problem sometimes, but never about the feelings of it.
Hmm.
And so that was something that we had to work through with people, was saying, hey, I know this is probably not a cultural thing for you, but if I'm going to work with you, then I saw the biblical reason for wanting to train them how to deal with their emotions and how to work through conflict and be forgive each other. Because what they would want to do is just like solve whatever the problem is. So if something's not right, then instead of going and dealing with the bigger issue, they would just deal with the little issue. Let's just fix this, or one guy would just say, okay, you do that, I'm out, I'm done. I mean, I've had people when I was in Russia, we would be working on a project or doing something, and then the next day they wouldn't even show up. And so then I would be telling the leaders, hey, what's going on with this guy? Oh, we don't know. He's not coming today. And then I would say, oh, no, I want to talk with them. They're like, you probably shouldn't. It's really not that big a deal. Maybe he's not feeling well. Well, then I would just let it go. But over time, the more I got to know the Russian people, the more I realized they were just avoiding the conflict.
Hmm.
So then when someone say to me, oh, maybe he's not feeling well or whatever, I said, no, no, no. Get him on the phone or take me to their house, or, somehow, some way before I left, we dealt with the issue. Most of the time it wasn't with me, but it could be with something that was happening or the way they were treated by somebody. And then we would work it out. It's very, very interesting dynamics. In America, it's not so much like this.
Hmm. It seems that in between Americans, if there is some conflict, it's like more clear when you speak about the problem, about the feelings, and it's much clearer than in between Russians, because they don't
Yeah.
want to speak about it.
Well, it's still messy, and there's still people who don't like conflict and people who are okay with conflict. They may not like it, but they're not afraid to have the conflict, right?
Hmm.
I think the difference between Russians and Americans is that Americans are always about themselves and feeling right, and feeling like they have a right. Like, you have these rights and you can live by these rights. And I think Russian culture creates an environment where it's not about you and your rights, it's this collective group. You live in this culture, and if you don't like something, you just kind of have to just go with it because there's no place to go. If I don't like my meal, like if I go buy something from McDonald's here and I don't like it, I go right back to the person who served me the food and say, I don't like this. And if they don't give me what I want, then I can say, give me your manager. And if the manager doesn't give me what I want, then I can write a letter to the corporate, and the corporate, someone will give me what I want if I feel wronged. And that's not a cultural thing in Russia. You know what I mean? Because you don't think about, you don't, I mean, I'm sure you have rights, but they're not necessarily like in America where it's like we all grow up thinking that we have these privileges and these rights, and they're all, see, in America, we don't all have the right to drive a car. And that even tells you in the laws that driving a car and having a license is a privilege. There's nothing in our Constitution, nothing in our government that made it a law that everyone who turns 16 must and be given a license. It's a privilege. But in America, Americans think, no, you should give me my driver's license. Well, you can't have it until you do these things to do, right? Now, at 18, I have the right to vote. And it doesn't matter who I am, what color I am, what religion I am. I have a right to express myself and vote for whatever I want to vote for. In fact, on our ballots, so these are our voting ballots, we just got them. If I don't like the candidates on my ballot, I'm given these little spots where I can write in names of the people I do like. So I could put your name, Dima. In fact, in some places, it's funny. Mickey Mouse from Disneyland will get about 100 votes for president. You see?
Okay. So you have
it's all right.
At the 8th of November, as I remember.
It's the 7th of November.
7th.
But you're right. No, you're right. I'm sorry. This year it's the 8th. That's right. It's a Tuesday.
That's interesting.
Yes, that's correct.
You're right that the Russian people just they often choose to suffer and keeping silence at some problems. Okay, so Michael, my last small question to you. Thank you for this time. What would you advise to the people who are moving to the other country, to the other culture? Maybe some skills to develop.
Yeah. 1 minute. I have to go to the bathroom. Coaching. Okay. If someone was going to a foreign country to live, I would strongly encourage them to study the culture. And if they're not going to learn language, at least learn some phrases and create either get an application to prepare them to be able to converse with people for specific things. And then what I would do is also I would learn how people get around and what transportation. And then I would probably highly recommend that when they get there, try to find groups because now the world's connected. So if I wanted to go, if I was going to go live in Volgograd, I could research and probably find people who want to speak English in Volgograd and meet some people and make some friends. So for me, because it's natural that we moved to a city where we already had friends, we had a church, we didn't have to do that. But if someone was going for a job for 2 years or something, that's what I would recommend. And I think those are important. And then probably the key principles for me is listen well to people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And I think one of the things that really helped me a lot was, and I know sounds really weird, but just smiling at people, showing them that I was friendly, because I'm a big guy. I'm 6'6", and I'm 300 pounds. Like I'm a big dude. And so when I'm in Poland or in Russia for sure, when I'm walking down the street or I'm in the mall walking around, I mean, people are staring at me. If I got a smile on my face, they smile back. Mm-hmm. Even in Russia. But if I don't have a nice smile on my face and I'm just walking around, doing my thing,
like Russia.
I think it doesn't. Yeah. In Russia, I noticed this wasn't so much in Poland, but I noticed in Russia almost all the time, Americans walk with their eyes up. Russians walk with their eyes down. So if they're looking up, they're looking directionally or they're looking for somebody or something. But if I'm walking down the street, you and you're Russian, it's more likely that you will try to keep your eyes from connecting with mine. Mm-hmm. But Americans, they like to make eye contact. So you go to the mall here, your eyes, you're connecting with every single person with your eyes.
That's interesting. And especially
yeah.
I can see it in Moscow when everybody just looks down. They all
yes.
are gentle, so kind, but looking down all the time.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was very interesting to me. So everywhere I've been to Russia is similar to Moscow. But when I'm in St. Petersburg, it's like I'm in a different country.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be because it's such a youthful and artsy town. You know, it's a very European
Mm-hmm.
town. It feels very European to me. That when I'm in St. Petersburg, it doesn't feel like I'm in Russia. I mean, I hear people speaking Russian. I see the babushkas. You know, there's Russian stuff everywhere, but it still feels like that I could be, you know, in Germany or France or Italy. You know, it's just so different.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you so much for this hour.
Yeah.
You told about your experience. It's very interesting. I knew about you a lot more, and I can understand you better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Well, God bless you, my friend. Have a good rest of your night, and I look forward to. Are we meeting next week?
Yeah. Yeah,
Let me see here.
we're meeting at the 3rd, as I suppose. I to
Yeah, the 3rd at
23rd.
2100. 2100. Okay. All right. I'll see you then.
Okay. So have a
God
nice
bless
day.
you.
God bless you.
You too. Bye bye.